Hello and good day. This is the Bible Bard. A bard is a storyteller who recites traditional text associated with a particular oral tradition, and I'm here to recite and to amplify what the literature of the Bible says about who is God and who are human beings. Here's the lesson, and here's the place we are at today. In the last podcast, we addressed what the Bible teaches about talking to God. However, there are a lot of people who do not believe in prayer because their belief is that while there's a creator, he does not intervene in the universe. He set it up, it's running like a clock full of natural controls, but he is off elsewhere doing God things. This belief is called Deism and means that human reason, based upon what can be observed, dictates that there is no deity who interacts with humankind. The Bible has a lot to say about this idea, especially in the first book in the Bible, titled after its main character, Job. This literature is over 4,200 years old and directly addresses the idea of a God who is not there as opposed to a personal God. Although the book of Job is quite long, 42 chapters and 16,921 words in the NIV, it is a literary dialogue between five people about the cause of suffering, in particular about Job's suffering. Here's our synopsis. In the story, the narrator tells us that God and Satan agree on a bet. The bet is that if Job is afflicted, with his children dying and he loses his riches and he's sickened with terrible boils all over his body, that Job will curse God. God disagrees and takes Satan's bet. Terrible things ensue for Job, and finally, sitting devastated on an ash heap, he enters into a dialogue with four men, Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, and Elihu, who come to him to comfort him in his distress, but end up discussing his plight. The first three men argue that God always protects the righteous, who they agree Job used to be, but insist that Job must have sinned against God, which explains his afflictions as punishment from God for his wickedness. Job disagrees. Job claims that he's innocent of any moral wrongdoing and that God is afflicting him in spite of his moral purity. Job's perspective is that as creator, God has the right to treat his creation any way he wishes. In fact, Job says to his unbelieving wife, Job chapter 2, verse 10, quote, "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" Unquote. When Job and his three friends come to an impasse, the fourth person, Elihu, speaks up with a different argument from them. Here are some excerpts from Elihu's narrative. In Job chapter 35, verse 20, Elihu says, "But if he, God, remains silent, who can condemn him?" In verses 6 and 8, same chapter, Elihu says, "If you, a human being, sin, how does that affect him, God? If you are righteous, what do you give to him? Or what does he receive from your hand? Your wickedness only affects humans like yourself, and your righteousness only other people." End quote. In verses 12 through 15, Elihu goes on, quote, "He, God, does not answer when people cry out. God does not listen to their wicked, empty pleas, and he does not take the least notice of wickedness." Unquote. And finally, in chapter 37, verse 23, Elihu says, "The Almighty is beyond our reach and exalted in power." Elihu asserts that the suffering and affliction of Job's moral goodness or badness, do not make any impact on God. And God is silent because he's beyond our reach. Discussion. The book ends with God appearing personally to Job and questioning him, and we see this in chapters 38 through 41. In this portion of the book, God lists many elements of the natural world and questions Job about his human understanding of the natural world and his power to affect any of the world's systems. Of course, Job admits, finally in chapter 42, verse 3, he says, quote, Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. End quote. So the book concludes with Job repenting for his argument that in spite of his moral innocency, God has chosen to become his enemy as evidenced by his afflictions. God then also, in addition to forgiving Job, God then chastises the three friends of Job and tells him that because they spoke incorrectly about God, Job must pray for them, or God will not forgive them their assertion that prosperity on earth is proof of God's favor and poverty or affliction is proof of one's sinfulness. That's what they said. Here is what is most important and something unsaid, yet that speaks very loudly. The narrative in God's remarks never mentioned the fourth comforter named Elihu. God never asked Job to pray for Elihu. Elihu is never forgiven. And because Elihu is not discussed by God, this in effect condemns Elihu's deism. Absolutely. Conclusion. Suffering in this life happens to every human being, rich or poor, righteous or unrighteous, the selfish or the generous, the kind or the cruel. Every human being is subject to conditions in the world and in human society that make them suffer. The book of Job presents four important ideas upon which all human relationships are founded. Number one, God is the creator of the universe, and he's placed the human race on earth. God has the absolute right to do anything he wants with his creation. And furthermore, this is the part people don't like, anything God does is not nor can be morally wrong or evil. Number two, believe that God created the world, set it in motion, but don't believe that God has left and just allowed it to run by itself. Number three, while some people are prosperous and others are not, the prosperous are not so because they are morally good, nor are the poor or the afflicted suffering because of their own evil thoughts, deeds, or sin. Number four, don't think that God doesn't care about each person's physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual condition. Instead, understand from the book of Job that God is involved in and observing everything in the natural world, the animal world, and in humanity. God can interrupt natural cause and effect, of course, that's supernatural, or he can allow natural cause and effect to run its course. In either case, and this is key, human beings cannot conclude anything about God's relationship to the world or to particular individuals other than what God himself has revealed in his word. This is a shocking conclusion. The idea that God is beyond human reach, or deism, is absolutely condemned by the book of Job. The idea that a person's economic or social situation, even their state of disease or good health, indicates anything about their moral or spiritual condition before God is rejected. The only thing that matters in a person's life, according to this literature, is that they recognize that they are infinitely valuable to God, and that they are also infinitely dependent upon God. Everything else taught in the Bible has its foundation here. Yes, God can condemn and punish the wicked at any time. Yes, God can bless, protect, and prosper the righteous whenever he wishes. But when God acts, what God chooses to do or not do, it's not up to human beings. God's actions do not depend upon human actions. We can pray, but we cannot manipulate. We can act, but how we act does not constrain God. While the book of Job tells us that God had great affection for, love, and appreciation of Job as a person, God nevertheless allowed Job to suffer. The reason given that God and the devil had a bet is, in my opinion, just a prelogue or a conceit of the story to make it work as literature. But this absurd idea clarifies any other rationalization people may have for why someone could suffer. Is it a bet between God and the devil? Well, any other reason you give is no better than that. The key verse Job speaks about human life is a verse about faith in a good loving God no matter our circumstance. Job says in Job chapter 19, verses 25 through 27, quote, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. After my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another. How my heart yearns within me. The message of the book of Job, the first book of the Bible, composed about 4,200 years ago in archaic Hebrew, is to seek God himself. There is no formal religion in the book of Job. Job yearns for God himself. Like Job, if you seek God, you will find that God is also seeking you. This is the way the Bible Bard works. Brief recitations, closely focused, no distractions, no rabbit trails. Follow the Bible Bard on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Send the Bible Bard any question or remarks you care to offer to BibleBardUS@gmail.com. Glad to hear from you. Thanks in advance for following and sharing content from the Bible Bard community, which is at www.biblebard.org, on Facebook, Instagram, iTunes, Rumble, SoundCloud, Spotify, TikTok, Twitter, and of course, YouTube. Until next time, this is the Bible Bard.